Michael Everett never imagined falling in love again, especially not at 58, and certainly not like this. A once prominent investment consultant turned recluse, Michael now lives quietly in a weathered coastal town in Maine. His days are structured, predictable, and intentionally hollow. Since the passing of his wife 6 years earlier, he's tucked himself behind routines, polished politeness, and the remnants of a fortune he no longer values. The stock market made him rich. Loss made him invisible. He's estranged from his daughter, disconnected from community, and a stranger to himself. Then he meets Sofia Blake. She's a 47-year-old hospice nurse with no pedigree, no interest in wealth, and a quiet resilience that unsettles Michael in ways he can't quite explain. They meet at a community estate sale, Sofia volunteering, Michael attempting to donate a box of his wife's old things and disappear unnoticed. But Sofia doesn't let people disappear, especially not the ones trying hardest to. Their first interactions are awkward, even tense. Michael's charm has edges. Sofia's kindness has depth. But over time, conversation turns into connection, and that connection forces them both to confront what they've spent years avoiding. Michael must reckon with the emotional walls he built not just around grief, but around guilt, particularly the mistakes he made with his daughter. Sofia, in turn, must challenge her lifelong belief that she's always been someone's second choice. Together, they step into a love neither of them saw coming, one that isn't loud or easy, but deeply human. And the question becomes, when love pulls open the parts of you you've kept buried, do you run or do you stay? Can love this late in life still teach us how to begin again? Is healing possible when the past is still within reach? And when comfort, pride, and emotional risk all pull in different directions, what would you choose? What would you do? Leave a comment below and tell us which moment from this story spoke to your experience. And if you believe in stories that feel real, raw, and quietly powerful, subscribe to our channel. We share emotional journeys that don't shout, they stay. It had taken him 4 years to climb those attic stairs. Michael Everett stood at the top now, one hand resting on the rickety wood banister, the other gripping a flashlight he hadn't turned on yet. Dust hung in the air like memory, thick, slow-moving, stubborn. The last time he'd been up here, Elizabeth was still alive. That morning was cold, too. She'd asked him to grab the winter blankets. She was always the one to think ahead. Extra throws, cedar pouches, holiday candles. He remembered her voice as she leaned against the hallway wall, breath short but stubbornly steady. "Second shelf, behind the luggage," she'd said. Now, the air in the attic felt like it hadn't been disturbed since. He flicked on the flashlight and swept it across the room. Boxes lined the low walls, labeled in her neat, looping handwriting. Some were practical. Kitchen, seasonal, books, college, Michael's office, others more intimate, photos, unsorted, wedding china, fragile. And then there it was. A small, almost unmarked box, taped tightly as if she knew one day he'd be tempted to peek but not ready to look. It said, "Closet, private." He hesitated, for a long time. Then he picked it up and descended the stairs slowly, like someone carrying something not heavy in weight but in consequence. Back in the living room, he set the box down on the carpet. The fire in the hearth flickered weakly. A pot of tea he'd forgotten to drink had gone lukewarm. He sat cross-legged beside the box like a man preparing for confession. The tape gave way with little resistance. Inside were scarves, a bottle of perfume, her favorite one, half-used, a silver bracelet he'd given her on their 20th anniversary, a folded note she'd never mailed, addressed to their daughter, and, tucked into the side, a Polaroid of the two of them, younger, wind-blown, standing beside their first car, laughing. He hadn't seen it in years. His hands trembled slightly. This wasn't just a box. It was a room she still lived in, tucked quietly into cardboard and linen. And for the first time in 4 years, Michael realized something. He had stopped grieving, not because he had healed, but because he had refused to feel anything that might reopen the wound. But now, the stillness had started to eat at him. He couldn't keep this all. He couldn't throw it away either. But maybe he could let some of it go. He folded the scarves, wiped the dust from the bracelet, and placed them gently back in the box. Then he opened his phone. At the bottom of a bulletin board in town, he had seen a flyer. Community Estate Day, donations welcome. Church basement, no questions asked. That was what he needed. The church basement smelled like cheap coffee and old mop water. Folding tables stretched across the floor, covered in books, teapots, puzzles, half-used candles. Volunteers buzzed politely, sorting boxes and stacking chairs. Michael stepped inside, the box held firmly at his side. He was nearly out the door before anyone spoke to him. But then he heard her. "You donating?" She had a warm voice, not overly cheerful, just calm, certain, like she wasn't asking to be polite. He turned to see a woman in her late 40s, soft-featured but strong in posture. No name tag, just presence. "Yes," he replied, short. She took a small clipboard from the table. "Would you like a receipt?" "No." She smiled gently. "Would you like to talk about it? The items?" He furrowed his brow. "Does that affect whether you take them?" "No," she said simply, "but it might affect how you leave." He didn't like how that sentence sat with him. He handed her the box. "No, thank you." She nodded, but didn't step aside. Instead, she asked, "What was her name?" He looked at her, hard, then softer. He didn't say a word. He turned and walked out, but not before hearing her voice again, quiet to herself. Someone loved her well. He paused at the door. She had seen something in him, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't mind being seen. The tides. He can't ignore. Michael Everett awoke at 5:47 a.m., though the number had lost nearly all meaning beyond routine. His alarm's soft chime cut through the stillness of his home in Camden, Maine. White clapboard siding, wind-battered rocks below, the Atlantic stretching out, uncertain and unhurried. He'd bought the house 20 years earlier, when the sea still sounded like possibility and open skies felt endless. Now it reminded him of something he'd long ago begun to avoid. He brewed black coffee, no cream, no sugar, and planted himself at the window while steam curled across the pane. Outside, the town slumbered, gulls tucked near their nests, street lamps casting halos in the fog. Across the table lay his late wife's empty chair, untouched for 6 years. He silently counted. 62 now, though in his mind he still felt, somewhere back where he had idea that life would stretch more than sorrow. After the brew, he climbed to his upstairs office. The room smelled of old cedar and worn leather, shelves of ledger binders from his consulting days, his walnut desk, a framed photo of her laughing at a summer concert. He flicked on a warm lamp and opened the file of his remaining investments, not because he had to, but because without it, silence filled faster than comfort. He'd retired early, convinced suits and boardrooms were done with him. Yet here he was, still tethered by numbers. At 6:30, the church bells tolled, a sound he'd depended on as a child but now heard as an elegy. He closed his eyes. "I'm alive," he told himself. Later that day, he drove into town to make the quarterly payment to his daughter, Emma's, college fund. He used to refer to it as a gesture of hope. Now it felt more like a ledger entry. Emma lived in Boston. They communicated sparsely, emails with "hope you're well," phone calls where hours hung unfilled. He parked outside the cafe she once insisted on when she visited as a child. The table inside held ghosts. He stared through the glass. He thought of the time she didn't ask him for lunch money, the time she didn't call home safely, the time the word "Dad" arrived without expectation. He pressed send on the payment screen and sighed. Maybe that's enough, he told himself, but the numbers whispered, not quite. Money didn't mend what never planted roots. Back home, he shuffled routines, checking stored firewood, refilling the bird feeder, trimming hydrangeas on the porch. Evening brought a long walk along the beach, cold wind biting his face, fingers dragging shallow grooves in wet sand. The ocean knew secrets. It carried them far beyond what he dared. On a Thursday morning, Michael retrieved a typed letter from his advisor. As discussed, the principle of the fund remains intact. The words pressed on him, not because of the content, but because of how clean everything had become. No emotion, no mess, no invitation. Later that afternoon, he headed toward the community donation event again, carrying the box labeled Closet Private. He recognized the face who greeted him. Sofia Blake. She didn't wear a name tag, but she didn't need one. She had presence. "Mr. Everett?" she asked calmly. He nodded. "Are you here for the donation?" "Yes." "Thank you. I'll take care of it." He held on to the box tightly. He thought he'd feel relief, letting go, but instead the weight of all his years pressed down. Sofia offered tea. He accepted. "You've been coming by," she observed. "I see you." He deflected. "I prefer to do things quietly." "Quiet," she said, "doesn't always mean peace." The tea soothed. He realized his hands were fine. They still trembled, but now from something other than cold. "Did you know her long?" Sofia asked. 32 years, Michael answered. 32 years of something. Now what comes next? He looked at her, startled by the question. She leaned forward. "Maybe you deserve to ask that." His breath caught. The next morning, the Atlantic was quiet. Too quiet. Michael stood on the porch, mug in hand, watching the horizon blur where water met sky. The world was unchanged. The house was the same. Yet inside him, something had shifted. It was the conversation with Sofia, her words echoing in his mind. Quiet doesn't always mean peace. He had lived by that phrase for years, mistaking his silence for strength. Now he felt it as something else, a gap. He made his way to the attic again later that day. The box marked Closet Private. Waited as though resigned. He opened it, took out the photograph of him and his wife. Sunlight angled across their faces, carefree, younger. He tucked it beneath his shirt and carried it down to the living room. He placed it beside his coffee cup, beside the bird feeder schedule, beside the empty chair. Later, he got in his car and went for a drive. Not because the app pinged or there was a destination, but because the road offered space. He drove north along the coast, the sea on his left, wind in his hair, steering without intention. He stopped at a small overlook, rolled down the window. The smell of salt and spray filled the air. The gulls cried overhead. He thought of the years spent avoiding the edge of things. Emotion, truth, connection. At the stop, he opened the photo again. He studied the lines of their faces, the ease with which they leaned into each other. Then he laid the photo on the dashboard, face up, and let the sea breeze touch it. For a moment, the wind lifted the corner. He watched it, weighed the image and the memory. Later that evening, Emma called. He heard the phone ring upstairs, paused it, then let it ring again. He didn't answer. The screen said Emma, and he stared at it. He thought of the lunch table she used to sit at, the trips to Boston for literature festivals, the half-finished novel she once joked she'd write. He realized he hadn't asked how she was, only how things looked. He set the phone down. Not tonight, he told himself. But then he walked downstairs and found the landline. He told himself he was just going for water. He dialed her number and listened as it rang. He heard her voice when she picked up. He heard the pause. He heard what she didn't say. "I saw the donation boxes today," Michael said. His voice was softer than he expected. "Oh," she answered, quiet. "That's good." He thought of Sofia. Yeah, it felt important. There was silence. "I'd like to visit next month," Emma said finally. "Okay," he replied. "That would be nice." They didn't talk about what he meant by important, nor why it had felt like more than a box, but for the first time in years, they ended the call without the pre-recorded closings. Later, in the glow of the fire, he found himself writing again. He hadn't written voluntarily since his journal entry the morning after his wife's funeral. He penned 2 pages, the photograph pinned to the corner of the table. He wrote about the sea, about loss, about how carrying something for too long weighed more than letting go. He wrote, "I am not the father I should have been. I am not the husband I will forget." He wrote about Sofia, a presence he didn't yet understand. He wrote about a question she'd asked. What comes next? He paused, touched the ink-smudged page. He hadn't asked that question out loud in 30 years. The following morning, the house was alive with sound. Not the roar of the sea, but something quieter. The creak of the front door, the hum of the oven, the bird feeder's chime. He made tea for 2. Not because someone came, just in case. The empty chair across from him seemed less accusing. He packed the box again, this time with intention. The scarves, the perfume bottle, the bracelet. He added the Polaroid. He taped it closed, labeled it Donation December. He carried it out to the car, felt the weight of it in his arms. At the church basement donation room, volunteers sorted items. He placed the box down. Sofia was there. She looked at him and didn't say, "I told you so." She just nodded. No words. Just presence. He spoke. "I left something behind." She replied softly. "Sometimes that's how we make room for what's ahead." Michael looked at her. He knew she meant something like hope, or change, or maybe just possibility. They walked to the driveway together after the sort was complete. Rain had begun again. Soft at first, then steady. The horizon was low, the sky a flat gray. "Thank you for seeing me," he said. Her voice was calm. "And thank you for staying." He stared at her for a moment. She met his gaze without flinching. The rain fell between them like a curtain. He dared to ask, "Where do you go now?" She shrugged. "Forward." And he believed her. When the mirror. Cracks. Michael hadn't expected to find himself in the cafe, not as a donor, not as a visitor, but something pulled him there. The gray Tuesday afternoon matched the color of his mood, steady, cold, avoiding anything that might shine too brightly. He carried another box, half-packed, labeled Gift Summer. Inside, the remains of a life he was supposed to forget. Sofia found him at the pickup table. She handed him a small slip. "Thank you," she said quietly. He looked up. The corners of his mouth lifted in a faint smile. "I guess I'm back." "Boxes don't ask questions," Sofia replied. "People do." The chill of her statement landed in the space between them. They walked together to the curb. He held the box in front of him like a shield. "Do you ever feel stuck?" Sofia asked once the box was in her care. Michael hesitated. "Isn't that life?" "Not necessarily." He looked at her, really looked, at the way her eyes held sympathy and something else. Shame, fear, honesty. They sat in the volunteer lounge afterwards. The decor was modest, mismatched chairs, coffee cups, shredded leaves under the door. But it felt real. "Tell me about her," Sofia said. Michael glanced at the box, then looked away. "You don't have to." "I do," she said. "People deserve someone who asks." He thought of his wife, of the laughter caught in a photograph. He thought of his daughter, of the empty chair, of the ledgers. "I miss her," he admitted finally. "More than I thought I would." Sofia nodded. "But do you miss her? Or the idea of her?" He didn't answer. They sat in silence for a moment too long. Over the next few days, Michael found himself returning to that cafe, not with donations, but to watch. Sofia moved among volunteers with a quiet strength. Michael watched her help a young man panic cry over a crumpled receipt. She asked his name, sat with him until the tremor stopped. Didn't rush him. Michael realized he was drawn not to her kindness, but to her presence. One morning, he called his daughter. "Emma, hi, it's me." She was guarded. "Dad, I'm around this weekend." "Okay." He said goodbye. The phone felt heavy. He closed his eyes. "I'm trying," he thought. That afternoon, he accepted Sofia's invitation. "Would you like to join our monthly volunteer drive? We're collecting winter coats this Saturday." He looked at the screen. He almost said no, but he didn't. On Saturday, the basement was colder than usual. The volunteers had stacked donations in neat rows. Michael arrived early. Sofia greeted him with a smile. "Welcome back," she said. He nodded. They sorted coats. He handed one to a teenager who shivered silently. Sofia watched him. "You did good," she said when they'd finished. Michael shrugged. "Just did what someone should." "Exactly," she replied softly. He realized her someone included him. They stood outside after. Snow had begun. Not full yet, but enough to cover the panes and fingers of wind reaching for jackets. "You're quiet," Sofia said. "Learning to be," Michael answered. She turned to him. "You don't have to be quiet here." He met her gaze. "What if I only know quiet?" "Then we'll start with that." Her words were small, but in them he heard possibility. Not loud, dramatic, but gentle. Real. That evening, Michael sat on his porch. The snow fell slow and steady. He held a coat from the drive, navy, slightly used. He smelled the fabric, smelled life. He didn't wear it. Instead, he wrote in a notebook he'd bought years ago and never used. "I gave a box away today. Inside was almost everything I avoided. She asked me to give it up. I asked to forget. Instead, I remembered. And maybe that's the start." He pressed the pen away and looked at the house, at the light in the window across the street. A family inside, laughter muted by glass. He thought of the dinner he skipped, the call he delayed, the words he held back. He stood and walked to the window. His reflection showed someone different, someone that he might get to know. The following week brought tension. Michael's financial advisor called unexpectedly. "Michael, your portfolio. We should talk." Michael hung up. He left the phone on the kitchen counter. He didn't feel like dealing with numbers. Not now. Instead, he visited Sofia at the clinic. She was busy. Charts, medicines, wristbands. He waited until a lull. "Hey," he said. She looked surprised. "Hey, I didn't get the envelope mailed." "What envelope?" "The one for Emma." Sofia raised her eyebrows. "Here," he said. He pulled it from his wallet. Inside was a blank card and the photograph of him and his wife, now slightly curled at the edges. "I thought she should see this," he added. She took the photo, turned it in her hands, studied it. "She'll like that," she said. "I think she'll understand." Michael nodded. He didn't know what understand meant anymore. He looked at Sofia. "Thank you," he said. She looked up. "I see you." Those words echoed. Michael left the clinic and walked to his car. On the drive home, he didn't feel the usual detachment. He felt the ache of exposure. The world felt changed. What we carry, what we fear. It was subtle at first. Michael noticed it during their fourth shared coffee at the clinic, a slight pullback in Sofia's voice, a new caution in her posture. She was still warm, still thoughtful, but there was space between her words now, like she was bracing herself for something unsaid. "I had a dream last night," Michael offered casually, stirring his tea. "I was back in the house I grew up in, everything smaller. My father telling me I should have done more. I didn't argue. I just nodded." Sofia smiled but didn't respond. He pressed gently. "You ever have dreams like that?" She looked up, surprised. Of being small again? Of being blamed for not knowing how to be something? A long pause. I used to, she said finally, when I was still married. Michael blinked. It was the first time she'd mentioned him. Her ex-husband. What was he like? She hesitated. Charming. Careful. A man who said the right things in public and the wrong ones in private. Michael nodded slowly. And you stayed? For a while, she said. You get good at believing small compromises won't become your whole life. He wanted to ask more, but her eyes warned against it. Days passed. Michael began pulling back again. Out of habit, not cruelty. He returned Sofia's text with short answers. He delayed stopping by the clinic, telling himself he didn't want to distract her. But really, he feared the weight of what was forming between them. It wasn't just companionship now, it was vulnerability. He had told himself he could do this. A slow connection. A safe friendship. But intimacy. That meant exposure. It meant standing in front of someone and asking to be seen again. This time, without the box of memories, without the charity of nostalgia. It scared him. Then came the phone call. Emma. Clearer voice this time. Direct. Dad, are you seeing someone? Michael nearly dropped his phone. What do you mean? I mean, Mom's old friend, Lisa. She said she saw you at the clinic. With someone. A woman. Michael bristled. People see too much. Emma was quiet. Then, I'm not asking to judge. I'm asking because if you are, I'd like to know her, or at least know you're not drifting anymore. He didn't know how to respond to that. I don't know what this is yet, he said honestly. That's okay, Emma replied. I just don't disappear again, Dad. Not now. Click. That evening, Sofia called him. Unusual. He answered. I want to show you something, she said. Tomorrow evening, if you're open to it. He agreed, though uneasily. She took him to a rehab center outside town. A modest, two-story building with soft light and wide porches. Inside, children and seniors played board games in separate corners. A community hub for those rebuilding. Physically, emotionally. I volunteer here on Fridays, she explained. It's not fancy, but it's real. Michael watched as she helped an elderly man to his walker and knelt beside a child trying to string together blocks with one hand. Later, they sat outside on the porch swing. This is where I come, she said, when I feel too much. Michael turned to her. And when you feel nothing? That's when I come to you. He didn't expect that. She leaned into the swing's rhythm. You've been pulling back. He didn't deny it. I'm not asking for promises, she said, just for honesty. He exhaled. I'm terrified. Of doing it wrong again. Of hurting someone I actually care about. You already care? Yes, he said. She looked at him for a long time. Then maybe it's not about doing it perfectly. Maybe it's about doing it anyway. The wind picked up. The porch creaked under their feet. I've been alone for a long time, he said. I know, she replied. So have I. They sat together until the sun dropped low and the crickets returned. They said little more. It didn't feel like resolution, but it felt like truth. And maybe that was enough, for now. When the caregiver needed care. The hospital corridor was too quiet for the hour. It smelled of antiseptic and old coffee, the kind that lingers even after midnight. Sofia Blake stood in the soft yellow glow of a flickering light, clipboard in hand, watching the world behind glass. 10 years earlier, that world had been her life. She'd come to hospice work almost by accident, one shift of volunteering during college, thinking it would look good on a resume. Instead, it stuck. The first time she held an elderly man's hand, he uncurled his fingers and said, "Thank you for seeing me." The humility in his voice stopped something in her. She stayed. But then, the day came when she needed to be seen. That morning, she arrived early. The ward was empty except for one patient, an older woman, sapphire blanket pulled tight around her shoulders. "I don't mind dying," the woman said. "I mind forgetting." They spoke for hours. Sofia listened, and when the IV beeps slowed, she held the woman's hand until it didn't move anymore. Walking out of the building, Sofia called her boyfriend Chris. They'd been dating 2 years, engaged for 6 months. "Chris," she said, "I did my shift. I don't know what I feel." He answered softly, "You've held that world. What now?" She didn't know. That night she discovered she was pregnant. She told Chris the following morning, his face blurred between surprise and something heavier. "I'm scared," she said. "You'll be fine," he replied. "We'll figure it out." They didn't. Several weeks later, she stood in her childhood bedroom, walls plastered with graduation photos, piano stickers, music notes. She stared at the positive test. It wasn't joy. It was a truth settling in. Chris left. He left before the line, "Congratulations." He left after the word, "baby." He left when the fear crept in. She packed her things that week, moved into a small studio apartment, working nights so the phone call from Chris didn't become the one she couldn't ignore. She stayed up with infants in the nursery at hospice while her world missed her. Then came the morning when the doctor said the baby had died. Sofia drove home under gray skies, rain on the windshield, the roads stretched out like unanswered questions. She parked in front of the old piano sheet, the one she used to play to feel safe. And she wept. In that grief fog, she stopped volunteering. She quit the night shifts. She stopped expecting anyone to ask how she was. Months passed. She carried a secret not of shame, but of absence. Years later, she returned to hospice. This time, not because she filled a space, but because she needed one. She learned to ask, "How are you really?" to her patients, rather than what the insurance paperwork required. She learned that people kept their dignity by being heard, really heard. And she learned about herself, that loving someone means making space for their fear, even when yours is louder. Back in the present, Sofia sat in the volunteer lounge, boxes stacked around, cups half full, voices distant. Michael was elsewhere in the hall, helping a delivery truck. She watched him. She thought of the corridor, of the woman with the sapphire blanket, of the baby loss. And she saw him. Not for what he managed, not for what he inherited, but for what he carried. That's why she'd stayed silent when he refused tea the first time. That's why she'd asked, what was her name? Even when he didn't want to say it. Because she knew what was behind, "I'd prefer to do things quietly." She walked over now, carrying a clipboard. "You okay?" she asked. Michael looked up. "I didn't know you'd been here so long." Sofia nodded. "I have my reasons." Michael paused. "You've seen so much of pain." "More than I choose to remember," she replied, "but less than I feared no one ever would." Silence stretched. Michael finally said, "You helped someone today. You changed something." She smiled weakly. "I hope." He looked at her. "You help everyone." Sofia's eyes focused on the window edge, the light fading. "Maybe," she said, "but sometimes it's the someone you don't help that teaches you the most." The words lingered, and for Michael they made sense in the way memory does. Unexpected, quietly firm, shifting the ground. He reached out, placing a hand on the box between them. "Thank you for seeing me." She looked at him then, not like a volunteer, not like a nurse, like someone who knows the weight of waiting. "You're welcome." And she meant it. When the Heart S. ledger opens. Michael Everett had always believed that time smoothed out grief, that the edges dulled, that the absence would eventually shrink into manageable corners. But what he was beginning to understand, what Sofia's presence had begun to unearth, was that time only disguises pain in more elegant clothing. The loss was still there, beneath the pressed shirts, under the spreadsheets and well-watered porch plants. It was the third week of December. The coast outside Camden was gripped by early winter, wet, gray, bone-deep cold. Michael stood in his living room, holding a half-written letter meant for his daughter, Emma. The words felt foreign in his hand. "I think I'm learning how to be here." He wasn't sure what he meant by here. In the town? In the present? In his own skin? The letter stayed on the counter. He hadn't sent it. Sofia, meanwhile, was entering her own storm. At the community center, she had taken on too much. The winter donation drive had doubled in demand. More families, more shortages, more last-minute dropouts. She moved between bins and clipboards, her smile practiced but thinner. One evening, she sat in her car outside the building, engine idling, unable to will herself to go home. Her apartment, quiet and sparse, no longer felt like safety. It felt like an echo. That night, she called Michael. "Are you free?" she asked, her voice low. "I can be," he said. They met at the small diner just off Route 1, the kind with sticky menus and the smell of fry oil clinging to the booths. Sofia looked tired. He didn't say so. Instead, he ordered her favorite tea without asking. For several minutes, they sat in silence. It wasn't uncomfortable, just heavy. "I'm stretched too thin," Sofia admitted. Michael nodded slowly. "I think I'm stuck." "Same thing, maybe," she said. "Different disguise." He wanted to reach across the table, but he didn't. Instead, he asked, "What do you do when everything feels like weight?" Sofia looked out the window. "I remember I'm allowed to set some of it down." She turned back to him. "Have you ever tried that?" "No," Michael said. "Not really." The following weekend, Emma called. "Dad, we need to talk," she said. Her tone wasn't angry, but it wasn't soft either. "Of course," he replied. "Can you come to Boston?" He paused. I've been meaning to. A beat. "I want to talk about Mom. And about you. About now," she added. Michael's throat tightened. "I'll come." He told Sofia 2 days later. They were walking along the shore, bundled in coats, hands close but not quite touching. "She asked me to visit," he said. "That's good," Sofia said, though there was something guarded in her voice. "I'm nervous." "Why?" He sighed. "Because I don't know how to be a father anymore. I think I only ever knew how to provide, not how to be." Sofia didn't respond right away. Then, "Maybe showing up is a good start." He looked at her. "Is that how you measure care?" "No," she said, "but it's how you start building it." They stopped walking. Waves crashed quietly nearby. "I don't want to mess this up," Michael admitted. "This us?" she asked. He hesitated. "Everything." She nodded slowly. "You will. Sometimes. So will I. That's not the question." "What is?" "The question is, will you keep choosing?" Michael didn't answer. Not yet. He drove to Boston 2 days later. The city felt too loud, too sharp-edged. He hadn't been back since Elizabeth's memorial, hadn't walked the brick sidewalks or passed the bookstore Emma used to drag him into. He parked outside her apartment and sat in the car for a while, watching the front stoop like it might say something first. Emma greeted him with cautious warmth. Her hair was shorter. She looked tired, but resolute. They sat in the kitchen. Her space now. Small, cluttered with books and plants and the kind of noise that only lives where healing has begun. "I heard from Aunt Lisa that you've been volunteering," Emma began. "I have," he said, and for once didn't add qualifiers. "With someone?" He nodded. "Her name is Sofia." Emma studied him. "Is she serious?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But she's real." "That matters," Emma said. She took a sip from her tea. "I'm not mad, Dad. I didn't expect you to feel again." Michael blinked. "I didn't either." They talked for hours, not all at once but in small, cautious waves. About Elizabeth. About the box in the attic. about who he had been and who he was trying to be. Emma didn't forgive him with dramatic declarations. She didn't cry or embrace him, but she stayed. She asked questions. She let him stumble. And when he left, she hugged him. A quiet, necessary thing. Driving back to Camden that night, Michael felt the weight shift. Not lifted, but shared. He pulled into his driveway past midnight. The porch light was still on. He wondered if he'd left it on, or if someone else had. Inside, he found a note slipped under his door. "When you're ready to stop keeping the ledgers, I'm still here. S." He sat with that note for a long time, because for the first time he wasn't afraid of what might come next. He was ready to choose. When the fortune reflects the heart. It was raining again, light, persistent, the kind of drizzle that soaked without warning. Michael stood by his living room window, holding Sofia's note between two fingers. It was a small thing, scrawled on lined paper, the ink slightly smudged, yet it felt heavier than any portfolio he'd ever managed. "When you're ready to stop keeping the ledgers, I'm still here." He whispered the words aloud. Michael had always kept accounts, not just financial, but emotional. Who owed him, who he'd failed, what he'd given, what he'd withheld. It was how he stayed safe. But now that safety felt like a prison. And Sofia, she was offering something terrifying. Freedom. He placed the note on the table, next to the unopened letter he'd written to his daughter years ago but never sent. He stared at both, two versions of himself, one silent, one reaching. At the clinic, Sofia moved like muscle memory. She was efficient, careful, kind, but distracted. She knew what she'd written to Michael. She knew the risk of inviting someone closer. That note wasn't just about romance. It was about permission. To fail. To hurt. To be known. She'd seen it too often. People like Michael who lived behind carefully drawn boundaries. They could give to others, but never to themselves. And she had made a quiet vow, years ago, not to love someone who only showed up halfway. Still, part of her hoped. That morning, while organizing supplies, she overheard a volunteer mention Michael's name. Her breath caught. "He's been different lately," they said. "Calmer. Lighter." Sofia smiled to herself. Just a little. Later that week, Michael appeared in the clinic doorway, rain still dripping from his coat. He held a small box, not of donations but of things he'd once stored for someday. He didn't speak at first. Sofia approached. "Is this—" "It's not for the donation bin," he said. He set the box down on a table and opened it. Inside, the watch he wore on his wedding day, the birthday card Emma made when she was 9, a half-used journal, pages filled with thoughts he never said aloud. At the top, a folded paper, the letter to Emma, finally finished. "I've been keeping all this," he said, voice low, "out of guilt, out of fear. I think it's time I stop storing my life and start living it." Sofia's eyes didn't leave his. "I want to try," he said. "Not to erase, not to fix, just to be present." She reached into the box and took the journal. "Then let's start here," she said. Their relationship, from that moment, didn't suddenly become effortless. If anything, it became harder. Real. They disagreed, about little things at first. Michael struggled to give up control over plans, finances, even meals. Sofia, used to independence, didn't always know how to accept care without suspicion. One evening, after volunteering, they argued about something small. He forgot to confirm a delivery. She double-booked a patient consult. Voices rose. Silence followed. "I'm not used to being wrong," Michael admitted afterward. "I'm not used to being worth the fight," Sofia said quietly. They sat in that silence, letting the words land. Michael reached for her hand. "I don't want to win. I want us to last." She looked at him. "Then we have to keep choosing, even on the days we don't feel like it." He nodded. especially then. Around Christmas, Emma visited Camden. The reunion was quiet but less tense. Emma brought photos of her mother, ones Michael hadn't seen in years. They sat around the fireplace, flipping through them. "She laughed differently when she was around you," Emma observed. "I don't know if it was better, but it was real." Michael smiled faintly. "I miss her, but I think I'm starting to miss myself less." Emma glanced at Sofia, who'd quietly joined them with hot cider. The two women exchanged a nod, acknowledgement, not permission. A beginning. On New Year's Day, Sofia and Michael walked the beach. The sky was overcast, but the ocean calm. They didn't speak for a while, just walked. Michael stopped near the rocks. "There's a part of me," he said, "that's still afraid this will vanish, that I'll wake up and it'll be a story I almost lived." Sofia took his hand. "Then let's keep living it," she said, "until it stops feeling borrowed." He turned to her. "Will it ever feel like it's mine?" "No," she said, "but maybe it'll feel like ours." They stood in that space, between waves and wind, past and future, and chose each other, not as escape, but as home. When the fortune reflects the heart. It was raining again, light, persistent, the kind of drizzle that soaked without warning. Michael stood by his living room window, holding Sofia's note between two fingers. It was a small thing, scrawled on lined paper, the ink slightly smudged, yet it felt heavier than any portfolio he'd ever managed. "When you're ready to stop keeping the ledgers, I'm still here." He whispered the words aloud. Michael had always kept accounts, not just financial, but emotional. Who owed him, who he'd failed, what he'd given, what he'd withheld. It was how he stayed safe. But now that safety felt like a prison. And Sofia, she was offering something terrifying. Freedom. He placed the note on the table, next to the unopened letter he'd written to his daughter years ago but never sent. He stared at both, two versions of himself, one silent, one reaching. At the clinic, Sofia moved like muscle memory. She was efficient, careful, kind, but distracted. She knew what she'd written to Michael. She knew the risk of inviting someone closer. That note wasn't just about romance. It was about permission. To fail. To hurt. To be known. She'd seen it too often. People like Michael who lived behind carefully drawn boundaries. They could give to others, but never to themselves. And she had made a quiet vow, years ago, not to love someone who only showed up halfway. Still, part of her hoped. That morning, while organizing supplies, she overheard a volunteer mention Michael's name. Her breath caught. "He's been different lately," they said. "Calmer. Lighter." Sofia smiled to herself. Just a little. Later that week, Michael appeared in the clinic doorway, rain still dripping from his coat. He held a small box, not of donations but of things he'd once stored for someday. He didn't speak at first. Sofia approached. "Is this—" "It's not for the donation bin," he said. He set the box down on a table and opened it. Inside, the watch he wore on his wedding day. The birthday card Emma made when she was 9. A half-used journal, pages filled with thoughts he never said aloud. At the top, a folded paper. The letter to Emma. Finally finished. "I've been keeping all this," he said, voice low. "Out of guilt, out of fear. I think it's time I stop storing my life and start living it." Sofia's eyes didn't leave his. "I want to try," he said. "Not to erase, not to fix, just to be present." She reached into the box and took the journal. "Then let's start here," she said. Their relationship, from that moment, didn't suddenly become effortless. If anything, it became harder, real. They disagreed, about little things at first. Michael struggled to give up control over plans, finances, even meals. Sofia, used to independence, didn't always know how to accept care without suspicion. One evening, after volunteering, they argued about something small. He forgot to confirm a delivery. She double-booked a patient consult. Voices rose. Silence followed. "I'm not used to being wrong," Michael admitted afterward. "I'm not used to being worth the fight," Sofia said quietly. They sat in that silence, letting the words land. Michael reached for her hand. "I don't want to win. I want us to last." She looked at him. "Then we have to keep choosing, even on the days we don't feel like it." He nodded. "Especially then." Around Christmas, Emma visited Camden. The reunion was quiet but less tense. Emma brought photos of her mother, ones Michael hadn't seen in years. They sat around the fireplace, flipping through them. "She laughed differently when she was around you," Emma observed. "I don't know if it was better, but it was real." Michael smiled faintly. "I miss her, but I think I'm starting to miss myself less." Emma glanced at Sofia, who'd quietly joined them with hot cider. The two women exchanged a nod, acknowledgement, not permission. A beginning. On New Year's Day, Sofia and Michael walked the beach. The sky was overcast, but the ocean calm. They didn't speak for a while, just walked. Michael stopped near the rocks. "There's a part of me," he said, "that's still afraid this will vanish. That I'll wake up and it'll be a story I almost lived." Sofia took his hand. "Then let's keep living it," she said, "until it stops feeling borrowed." He turned to her. "Will it ever feel like it's mine?" "No," she said, "but maybe it'll feel like ours." They stood in that space, between waves and wind, past and future, and chose each other. Not as escape, but as home. When all accounts are open. The boardroom at Whitmore Holdings felt cold, even with floor-to-ceiling windows letting in the pale December sun. Ice formed on the ledge outside, thin ribbons of frost curling like old love letters left too long in drawers. Michael Everett stood in the doorway, ticketed for a world he barely knew. A world of legacy, spreadsheets, press, and now, love. He'd wearing his charcoal suit, tailored by the department store algorithm that assumed someone like him cared about labels now. His tie was navy, said nothing. His shoes shone just enough. He felt like someone borrowed. The table was vast. Leather chairs lined both sides. At the head sat Beatrice Whitmore. Across from her sat two senior executives and a handful of board members. They looked like men and women accustomed to decisions made long before morning coffee. Michael felt their gaze as a weight, not curiosity, not friendliness, but calculation. Beatrice didn't smile. She said, "Michael Poitos Everett, thank you for coming." "Thank you for inviting me," he replied. Her voice was calm. "We've seen your volunteer work. We've seen your involvement with Ms. Blake's clinic. We've seen you with donations and charity events. What we haven't seen is a plan." Michael sat. "When Ms. Everett passed," Beatrice continued, nodding toward a framed photo behind her showing Grace Whitmore in younger years, "it was always understood that the foundation would merge into the family legacy. Ms. Whitmore reworked the will, yes, but she left the structure intact. It wasn't about giving away power. It was about protecting it." "I understand." "Fine. Because you need to," she said. "What do you want?" Michael exhaled. "I want truth. I want to be present. I want to live without the ledger." Beatrice's eyes narrowed. "Nice sentiment. Not measurable. Not profitable." He paused. "Do you want measurable? I suppose I could secure a six-figure gift, establish a fund, adopt a name, but that's not why I came." She tapped her pen. "Then tell me, are you here to take or to build?" He looked at her. "With her legacy, I built. With mine, I belong." Silence like glass fell then. One board member, a salt-and-pepper-haired man named Donovan, leaned forward. "You were an outsider, a widower who donated belongings. Now you show up at clinics, foundation dinners. You've done enough if you wanted to satisfy the papers, but you're here asking for identity. Michael felt his throat tighten. Identity, he said quietly. Yeah, I've spent years hiding behind what people thought I was supposed to be. Beatrice stood. Then, prove it. She pressed a folder toward him. This is the restructure proposal. We expect you to at least read it. Then you'll decide, join, accept our terms, or walk away. He accepted the folder with a slow nod. Welcome to one end of the spectrum, Beatrice said. We'll watch where you stand when the meeting ends. She dismissed him. Michael picked up his coat and left the glass tower. The cold hit him as the sliding doors closed behind him. His phone buzzed, a text from Sofia. You okay? He typed back, not yet. That night, Michael returned to his house along the rocky coast. The waves thundered louder than the freeway noises he used to know. He found the closet, private. Box in his study, opened it. He retrieved the Polaroid photo of him and his wife, the bracelet, the perfume bottle. He laid them on his desk. Then he wrote in his journal, I walked into a room built for birthright. I walked in wearing self-right. She asked me if I'd take or build. I said build. What does build mean when everything I have came through withdrawal? He closed the journal and pushed it aside. Then he made a call. Sofia didn't answer. He left a message. I'm in the room, I'm in the game, but I don't know the rules. He felt exposed. Over the next week, everything accelerated. Michael's daughter Emma arrived in town. Not fully announced. She invited herself as though she expected him to say yes. He said yes. Sofia arranged for Michael to volunteer at the clinic on the same afternoon Emma would visit. She wanted a scene where Michael was doing what he was becoming, not what he was escaping. They sorted intake forms together, Michael handing out coats this time, the same ones he once held in forgetting. Emma watched. When Michael saw her watching, he looked away. Later, Emma asked, Is she helping you figure this out? Michael said, I hope she's helping me live. Emma nodded. It matters. And it did. Then the public side hit. An online piece. Widower heiress joins foundation. Michael Everett's name attached. Comments followed. Questions. Did he inherit or did he buy his way in? Is he a charity case or a change agent? The old ledger in his mind lifted every one of these. He felt them as reflections in glass. Tall towers, bright lights, people looking in. He went to Sofia's clinic one evening. Her face was drawn. There was a folder with his name on it. What is this? He asked. She handed it across. It's a check. Amount, $50,000. For the winter drive. The foundation approved it. Michael took it. He felt the weight of zeros. He also felt the weight of being witnessed. It's not mine, he said. It's hers. Then make it ours, she replied. His phone rang. It was Beatrice. We need your signature by noon tomorrow. Michael looked at the check, at the snow outside, at the early frost reaching the windows. He realized the decision wasn't about money. It was about meaning. A week later, the restructure draft sat in his driveway, unopened. He stared at it as though it were the box from the attic, the same label. Closet. Private. But this time, it wasn't about hiding. It was about opening. He met Sofia in the morning at the clinic. Can we talk? She followed him outside. He showed her the draft. I'm terrified, he said. Welcome to the truth, she offered. He looked at her. If I sign, I change more than my address. You already did, Sofia said. He exhaled. He knew what he wasn't sure how to do. Trust. How do you measure build? He asked. She smiled. You decide. I'll stand next to the blueprint. When what's left is real. It was snowing the morning Michael Everett made his choice. Not the sharp, punishing kind of snow, but soft, slow-falling flakes that reminded him of childhood, of walking home after piano lessons, of his mother humming in the kitchen, of a world that still felt simple. He stood on his porch holding the restructure proposal in one hand and Sofia's folded note in the other. One was printed on glossy, watermarked stock with corporate headers. The other was creased, handwritten, and fragile. Both told the truth. He placed them side by side on the kitchen table, poured coffee, and stared. He thought of Emma, of her voice when she asked him to be present, of Sofia, asking not for a promise but for choice. And he realized something he hadn't let himself admit before. Every version of his life had been a transaction. The grief, the generosity, the silence, they were all ways of bartering with the past. But what he was building with Sofia wasn't a trade. It was trust. And trust, he realized, begins when the ledger closes. He drove to the clinic just after 8 a.m. Sofia was restocking bandages behind the front desk. When she saw him, she didn't smile. Not yet, but she didn't look away either. "I signed it," he said. She blinked. "The restructure?" "Yes, but I added a clause." She raised an eyebrow. Michael pulled a folded sheet from his coat. "The clause says the foundation must fund community-led programs designed by people like you, not just in your name, but with your voice." He held her gaze. "I don't want to be part of something inherited. I want to be part of something chosen." Sofia stepped around the counter. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "I know." She nodded. "Then thank you." He looked at her. "I'm still afraid. So am I," she whispered. And for the first time, the fear didn't feel like an obstacle. It felt like a beginning. Weeks passed. The snow deepened. The foundation announcement was quiet. No press release, no gala, just a shared photo of a check passed from Michael to the clinic team and Sofia beside him, laughing in the background. The caption read, "Community first, always." Emma visited more often. They had Sunday dinners now, simple meals. She brought books and stories. Sometimes Michael listened without needing to speak. Other times he told her things he'd never said before. About fear, about shame, about how her mother saved him once by simply believing he wasn't a broken thing. And now, he told her, he was learning to save himself by believing he still mattered. One Friday night, Sofia invited him to a volunteer appreciation dinner. Nothing fancy. Church basement, casserole trays, string lights that blinked too fast. She wore a red wool scarf. He wore a sweater she teased him for not ironing. During dessert, someone put on music. Old Sam cooked. Couples danced. People laughed. Sofia stood beside him, swaying slightly. "You used to dance?" she asked. "Only in parking lots," he replied. She extended her hand. "Let's change that." They danced, awkwardly, softly, surrounded by people who didn't care about form. He whispered once, "I miss this." She smiled. "Me too." Outside, the snow had begun again. Michael walked her to her car. Before opening the door, she turned. "You're different," she said. He shrugged. "You're patient." "No," she said. "You decided." He leaned in. "I'll keep deciding." They kissed, not like teenagers or movie stars, but like people who'd found something rare. Timing. Back at his home, Michael took the box once labeled "Closet, Private," and wrote a new label on its side. Lived. Inside, he placed the old journal, the first scarf he gave to the winter drive, the signed restructure copy, and a photo of him and Sofia. Smiling, unscripted, real. He sealed it, not because it was over, but because it had begun. One winter afternoon, Michael found himself behind the wheel again, but this time not to escape. He drove through towns he used to avoid. He stopped at a small seaside lookout and leaned on the hood, watching kids skate on frozen ponds, couples bundled in park benches, dogs bounding through snowflakes. He reached over and took Sofia's hand. She didn't see life through numbers like he once did. She saw through presence. "What do you see?" he asked. She looked at the horizon. "People." He nodded. "I used to only see potential profit." She squeezed his hand. And now I see purpose. They stood together for a long minute. In March, as the first thaw betrayed winter's rule, the foundation board met again. Michael appeared not as an invitee, but as a partner. Beatrice looked up as he entered. Her posture changed. There was something else in his presence now. Less hesitation, more reflection. She nodded. Mr. Everett. He smiled. Michael. When the meeting ended, he walked out of the glass tower and didn't glance back. The snow was gone. Puddles caught the early sunlight. He left wearing boots, not polished shoes, a reminder of where he came from and where he was going. At home, the bird feeder overflowed with new seed. The hydrangeas still slept under blankets of burlap. He poured himself a cup of tea before dawn and looked at the empty chair, no longer empty. Sofia entered quietly. Tea? She asked. Yeah, he said. She sat. They didn't exchange words. They just watched the fog lift over the ocean. He reached for her hand. Thank you, he said, for staying. She turned. Thank you for choosing. They sat in silence. The first signs of spring came subtly to Camden. The last frost lingered on window panes at dawn, but by mid-morning, sunlight stretched a little longer. Trees stood leafless but softened, as if preparing for color. Michael Everett woke before the light changed the shape of his bedroom, not out of habit, but out of readiness. He moved through the kitchen like a man returning to his own story. There were 2 mugs on the counter, one he'd always used, and another Sofia left on her last visit. He washed both, poured tea into each, and when the kettle hissed, he didn't rush to shut it off. He let it sound, let it announce morning. Sofia arrived soon after, her hair tucked under a scarf, cheeks red from wind. Still too cold for April, she said, smiling. Not forever, he replied, handing her the mug. They stood together by the window. No words for a moment, just the quiet recognition of ritual, something earned, not forced. I dreamed I was walking into a meeting, Michael said, breaking the stillness. But this time, I wasn't presenting anything, just listening. Sofia raised her brow. That's a dream you might want to live. He laughed softly. I think I'm trying. They sat at the small kitchen table where stacks of papers once lived. Now it was clean, just tea and a notebook turned to a fresh page. I used to think presence meant showing up with answers, he said, but sometimes it means showing up without them. Sofia nodded, her gaze settling on his. And staying anyway. Michael leaned back in his chair. I've spent so many years calculating what I gave, what I lost, what I earned. But now, I just want to count what's real. He looked down at his hand, resting beside hers. This feels real. She didn't say anything, just moved her fingers slightly, touching his. That afternoon, they walked along the edge of town. Not by the beach this time, but through the neighborhood. Children zipped by on scooters. A dog barked from a porch. For the first time in years, Michael waved to someone without remembering their name, and it didn't bother him. Sofia gestured to a row of planters outside a coffee shop. We're adding herbs and flowers next month, she said. Volunteers will manage it. He smiled. You're turning this place into something alive. It already was, she said. We just needed to notice. Later, back at the clinic, Michael dropped off a box of books, memoirs, biographies, even old business texts from his past. He placed them on the new shelf labeled Borrowed and Returned. When Sofia passed by, she paused. Letting go? She asked. Letting through, he corrected. I think I want my past to help someone else now. They stood quietly, surrounded by voices and activity and movement. Michael used to be intimidated by places like this, too unpredictable, too messy. Now, it reminded him of why he'd stayed. In the evening, back home, he reached for the wooden box once labeled Closet, Private. The one filled with his old life. He opened it slowly, looking over its contents. The journal, the photo of Elizabeth, Emma's childhood drawing, the foundation restructure copy. One by one, he lifted each item, not to relive it, but to understand it. He took out the old journal and read the first line he ever wrote in it. I don't know where to begin again. And then, in pen, he added underneath, I began by choosing to begin. He placed the journal back inside, closed the lid, and retaped the label. This time it didn't read private. It read, lived. A life that looks forward. Spring was no longer a promise. It had arrived. The chill had softened, the trees near the clinic now bore early buds, and people lingered outside longer than necessary, warming their hands around coffee cups, not just from cold, but from a renewed sense of time. Michael Everett stood by the garden beds that lined the rear of the volunteer center. The soil had just been turned. Sofia stood beside him, holding seed packets and smiling. Can you believe we're planting something? She asked. He smiled gently. I spent my life pruning things, controlling them. But planting? No, this is new. They knelt in the dirt, side by side. Michael cupped a single seed in his palm. Basil, she said, and dropped it into the ground with care. Funny, he murmured, how something so small can be the beginning of everything. That's love, Sofia said. That's change. He looked at her. That's terrifying. She laughed. But we're doing it anyway. A few days later, Michael and Emma met at the Coastal Cafe, the one they used to visit years ago before the grief built walls between them. This time, they sat by the window. Emma held a notebook with project ideas for her nonprofit. She asked Michael for thoughts, not because he had money, but because he had lived what she now wanted to build. You've changed, she said suddenly, looking up. I hope so. No, I mean, Dad, I can feel it. You don't disappear in the middle of conversations anymore. He looked at his coffee. I stopped disappearing from myself first. She reached across the table and squeezed his wrist. I'm proud of you. His eyes misted, but he didn't look away. I'm learning to live without apologizing for where I started. Emma smiled. Where you started doesn't define where you're going. In April, the Foundation launched a new series of grants under the title The Presence Initiative. The logo was simple, an open hand holding a single leaf, designed by Sofia, approved by the board unanimously. Michael gave no speech at the event. Instead, he stood in the back, watching as community leaders and local families took photos, shared food, and told stories of how a small clinic had become a lifeline. Sofia joined him by the back wall. You okay? He nodded. Better than okay. Because of this? No, he said, taking her hand, because I'm not alone in this anymore. At home, the hydrangeas bloomed weeks early. Michael tended them gently, careful not to overwater, careful not to expect too much too fast. He liked the way they came back year after year, never quite the same, but always rooted in the same soil. One evening, Sofia asked him to play the piano in the volunteer center. I haven't played since Emma was a little girl, he confessed. That's exactly why you should. He sat down, hesitating. Then he played. Not perfectly, not even smoothly. But the sound filled the room, and a few volunteers stopped to listen. Afterward, Sofia said quietly, I hope you know what that means. I'm remembering, he replied, who I was before I tried to be who I wasn't. In late May, they hosted a dinner. Nothing fancy, just homemade pasta, candles, laughter. Emma brought a new friend. The clinic volunteers brought dessert. There was no speech, no fundraising, no formality. Just warmth, presence. After everyone left, Michael and Sofia stood in the kitchen, rinsing glasses. Do you think we'll always be this lucky? He asked. Sofia dried a dish. I don't believe in luck. I believe in choosing. He turned to her. Then I'll keep choosing. She smiled. So will I. That night, as the house grew quiet, Michael sat by the fireplace with a cup of tea. The room was still, but not empty. He looked around. Photos, shoes near the door, a second mug on the table. His life no longer lived in the shadows of what he'd lost. He wrote one final line in his journal. "My wealth was never in what I saved. It was always in what I shared." He closed the book and set it beside the seed packets on the windowsill. Tomorrow they would plant more, but tonight they had enough. The night was warmer than it had any right to be. The winter's grip had loosened days ago, but the air still held a crisp note, like a promise whispered and nearly forgotten. Michael Everett sat on his porch, a mug of tea in hand, watching the tide push forward and retreat. It struck him how little the sea asked of him and how much it gave away. Beside him, Sofia slipped into the chair. She had removed her coat, her scarf still catching the last glow of streetlight. She took her tea and let the steam rise between them. They sat quietly in the kind of silence that doesn't demand comfort, just acceptance. Michael looked toward the horizon. "Do you ever think about where all this came from?" She glanced at him. "Every now and then." He turned to face her. "My life used to feel like a ledger. Entries made, balances kept, errors hidden. I thought I could engineer everything, even this." He gestured between them. "But you showed me. It's not about what you hold. It's what you open." She smiled, not too wide. "And you've done that." He reached for her hand. "Not yet fully, but I'm trying." They paused. A crabby gull cried somewhere. A boat's light flicked in the distance. The world, quiet, alive, folded gently around them. Months had gone by since the foundation had shifted, since the garden had been planted, since he and Sofia began choosing each other each morning, not from convenience, but from conviction. The house was no longer a museum of legacy. It had become a home of co-creation. Inside, the hydrangeas bloomed brighter than he'd ever hoped, their petals layered in pale blues and dusty pinks, reminding him of improbable things: resilience, renewal, love. His daughter Emma visited often now, not out of obligation, but because she wanted to. They still didn't talk about everything, but they talked about something. Plans for her nonprofit, quiet jokes, shared books, Sunday dinners that lasted past dessert. Michael realized that legacy wasn't just what you inherited. It was what you allowed yourself to become. And fortune wasn't only what you accumulated, it was what you offered. He opened his journal later that morning and wrote, "We are the seeds planted in someone else's soil. If we care for them, we bloom. If we don't, they wilt." He underlined the word bloom twice. In the garden behind the clinic, the one he helped plant, children ran between the beds. Volunteers sorted herbs and flowers, discussed workshops and next autumn's plan. Michael watched Sofia coordinate people. No clipboard in hand, just presence, a gesture she'd taught him. He walked to the little stone bench near the basil patch. He sat. A mother passed, thanked him for the scarves last winter, for a moment of dignity when help came quietly. He nodded. He didn't say much. He didn't have to. This time, his presence was enough. Sofia came and stood beside him. They watched the sunlight catch the basil leaves. She leaned her head on his shoulder. He didn't speak. He just offered warmth. As evening approached, Michael prepared for a small gathering at his home. Friends from the foundation, volunteers, Emma, and her new friend. They gathered in the living room where the once unused chair across from his seat was now consistently filled. Conversations were soft, laughter more frequent. No speeches, no fundraising pitch, just a meal and company. Later, Sofia still in the kitchen, Michael followed her. He brought 2 mugs filled with tea and placed one in her hand. She turned. "Look," she said, pointing to the window. Outside, the sea was calm. The moonlight painted silver arcs across the waves. He took her hand. "Here," he said. "This is home." She nodded. Thank you for bringing me here. Thank you for making me come." Their smiles faded into each other's faces. They didn't need more. Before the guests left, Michael stepped outside with Emma. She zipped her coat, looked at the house softly lit, the garden faintly visible. She turned to him. "Dad," she said, "thank you for staying." He felt the weight of the phrase. Long ago, staying would have felt like submission, but now it felt like strength. "I'm glad I did," he said. She walked away. Michael watched her go, the wind catching her hair, the laughter in her step. He thought of all the times he hadn't stayed, the business trips, the silences, the distance. And he understood. Staying didn't mean giving up. It meant showing up. That night he returned to his study. He opened the "lived at" box for one last time. He removed nothing. He didn't rearrange. He closed it gently, then placed it on the shelf beside the window. He looked at the sea through the panes. The tide came in. It pulled away. Footprints washed out, but new ones would come. He stood and joined Sofia on the porch. She sipped her tea slowly. "Where do we go now?" he asked. She smiled at the question. "Forward," she said. He nodded. "Forward." They stayed like that for a long time. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them had to. The ocean whispered. The house exhaled, and two hearts, once guarded, once distant, once shaped by fortune or fear, now beat in rhythm. Life is neither a ledger nor a legacy alone. It's the little choices, repeated, the simple acts of showing up, the vulnerable words shared, the seed planted without certainty of bloom. Michael and Sofia learned that. They lived it. And as dawn broke the next morning, they opened the door together, stepped outside into the soft light, and began again. And now we ask you, the ones who've walked this journey with us, have you ever met someone who challenged the story you were telling yourself? Do you believe that love can arrive not in youth or perfection, but in the quiet spaces between grief and renewal? What would you choose, if no one was watching, when faced with the chance to rebuild your life? And if you've ever been afraid to start over, what if the greatest part of your story hasn't happened yet? We'd love to hear from you. Was there a moment in Michael and Sofia's story that struck a chord with your own? Leave a comment below sharing what moved you the most, or what you would have done differently. And if stories like this inspire you to reflect, to feel, and to hope, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Because here, we believe that sometimes, the simplest stories are the ones that change everything. Until next time, keep choosing.